the So good morning, everybody. Thanks for that kind introduction, Arun. I look forward to the facilitation of the questions later. Kristel and I will be sharing parts of the talk. I'm really delighted Kristel can join today. She's in European time, and I'm actually in Mountain time, coming from Mexico City. So we're in different time zones, and it just happens we can both be here today. So I want to acknowledge that it's a rare and happy, well, it's not that rare, but it is timely that when we can both meet and join with you today. So I'll also want to say about the book itself. The Design Journeys Through Complex Systems. It is the first, it's called a trade book, but it's the first, publicly available book that's not academic on systemic design. Kristel and I had the idea to write a book as we had been developing training materials for the Systemic Design Toolkit and doing quite a bit of both formal and informal trainings, and realized that we had, we were training in similar ways, and there was a lot of background information that people needed to read to learn the toolkit. And so we worked that into, I think, a much more accessible approach with Design Journeys, which has references to the original systems theory, describing the models and tools that we do reference. And that's how I teach it as well in our graduate programs at OCAD. So we designed this to be a handbook for designers. And it's also designed for service designers, interaction designers, to learn systemic design and apply it in the more complex situations, complex projects that we're more often taking on. And because the whole book is oriented towards training designers to learn to do collaborative stakeholder engagement for addressing complex societal issues that may often come up within even service design or other design contexts. So it's a way of bringing people into systemic design. It's not a super lengthy book. If you don't have the print book yet, I'd recommend getting the print book. I believe both Kindle, the online is just, or the electronic copy is not going to be as satisfying. It's a BIS book, which is a design publisher. And also, as I had dropped a hint on LinkedIn yesterday, Kristel and I had actually revised the book. The publisher decided not to say it was a revised edition, but it has more revisions in it than many revised editions. So we did this partly because there were some corrections we needed to make. There were a few dangling sentences and things I didn't actually catch, and we didn't catch in the proofing of the book. And there were then the opportunity to clarify and edit more tightly so that we could add some more. So it's not a super lengthy book, but there's a lot in it that has been tightly, has been well developed for the kinds of uses we designed it for. We think it has a very good interface with service design. Both Kristel and I teach service design and systemic design. And in the Design for Health program at OCAD, those are actually combined together. So that's when our graduate students learn service design within complex system design, because healthcare has to in my view, has to look at everything as being part of a complex system. Kristel and I also teach an online service design college course, which has also just started, Systemic Design for Tackling Complexity, where the book and the toolkit and the training are all done in an 8-week period. So it's kind of like a college course spread out online. And then you can also find us at the RSD Symposium this year. That's going to be live in Oslo, but also an online component. All the submissions are in, but people can still attend or pay attention, attend it online. So that's RSD Symposium. We'll share the slides with you too. So if you have it, so can share the slide deck as a PDF. So I'll cover a little of the background of the book, and then we'll share a couple of the tools in the book with you. So the Design Journeys teaches what we call tourists and explorers to learn to practice systemic design from their different levels of expertise or introduction into the discipline. Tourists are people that might be your managers, might be clients, people who are stakeholders in the different projects you're working with that are curious and interested in the engagements in design tools or in the facilitation processes, but they're not yet experts. Think of the design journeys and the journeys literally as kind of a tour guide through using systemic design thinking and developing that for tourists who are learning the different pathways and the journeys to different destinations, the different cities and destinations that the tools lead to. And then we have explorers, which are already experts in either systems thinking or in advanced design or systemic design. And they're already working with applications, and they can use this as a handbook, and there are guidelines for how to facilitate that what we call explorers can use right away. So systemic design you can think of most simply, may not be the most effective way, but the most simple way to think of it is the interface of design thinking and systems thinking. But because systemic design is really an applied design practice, it takes what we've learned from the thinking modalities, and it looks very abstract with all the tools and models that are in the book and that you use on Miro boards or can print out and use with your clients and stakeholders. But it is always meant to be like an applied practice in the same way that service design would be, in which we're just more often working with longer time frame types of complex problem areas that will take longer to work through very often to develop more practical interventions and applications and implementation. It is not as straightforward as product or service design in that way. And we think of the services, that is not just, that is the service design intends to co-create and to map out and blueprint can be parts, for example, of a healthcare system, or if we look at a retail system for a large retailer like IKEA, or changing a clothing company that is trying to move away from relying on fast fashion. We would look at consumerism. We'd look at the services that are reinforcing the problems and try to change those. We would look at the interactions and design well at the level of interaction. Those are all parts of the complex system. And so by co-designing with stakeholders and constantly, bringing in other experts or reinforcing and informing ourselves about complexity in the problem areas, we are always informing the stakeholders and ourselves and moving through a series of engagements. We'll show you the methodology in a minute. The systemic design can be seen as design for systems and organizations as well. So it encompasses what we call in design domains, this design 1.0 to 4.0 model, which was originally developed by G.K. Van Patter, and I worked with him on the deployment of this over many years. So this is now about 25 years old. But we didn't call it systemic design back then. This has evolved since about 2010. And so systemic design encompasses the methodologies and the other disciplines as well. It isn't the aggregate of them. It isn't a super system in which organizational, social innovation, design, product and service design, artifacts these are all kind of choices and disciplines that deal with different levels of markets, of different users, and have different relationships to complexity. So design each 0.0. So artifact design is not very complex. A single designer and a single client can develop, a graphic communication design, a website. It still could be high quality design. We think of it as generally artifacts and communications. It's very similar to Richard Buchanan's model in that way, but he doesn't distinguish these as different skill disciplines, which they are. And they require learning different methodologies and epistemologies, which are appropriate at each level. Working with organizations is very complex, time-consuming, and requires working with all the different, roles and levels of the organization and their power. And systemic design takes the organization and its stakeholders into account. So we're dealing with a lot of, in the bullet list here, of these complex organizations, networks, policies, systems change. And and so we talk a lot about that in the book. So I'll try to go through some of this really quickly. You can also see this in the book and in the slides. So it's a handbook, and the book is a handbook, but the systemic design toolkit is also available to use right out of the online download to become a box of tools that are described in the toolkit or in the design journeys that you can use for these applications. And then we believe that a lot of systems and organizational change, design 3 and design 4, is done from within the stakeholders, by the stakeholders themselves, by the actors in the system who we sometimes need to take time to discover, to research and to co-research and to bring into the engagements. So they become part of the journeys with us. They co-travel, they become tourists or maybe explorers. And so we have co-creation sessions, online or in Miro boards or in printouts or in workshop sessions, and we use a dialogue approach. And we may set up multiple workshops over 7 stages of the toolkit, and these are chapters in the book. Now, Kristel and I will almost never use all 7 stages within a project, because that would be a very extensive project, and we very often have to adapt the methodology to the client engagement and to try to get them to a place where we can move them into implementation and sometimes revisit other stages, which is, or to develop in a more incremental way. So every project is going to be different, but we try to keep the mindset of these 7 stages because each one contributes differently to the overall value. And so we think of them as the top 3 here. They're actually kind of split into parallel paths. There are 3 stages which are more oriented towards systems thinking, system models that are informed by design thinking. So framing the system, understanding the system, and then in stage 5, exploring the possibility space. But as we go from 1 to 2, we kind of focus. We go from more systems oriented to more design oriented, design research and listening to the system. And then from understanding the system modeling, to envisioning with the stakeholders and reframing. So it's more design led. And that's a way to think about the different stages of the methodology. I'll say very little about this here, just in essence of time, but there's also, think of this as the engagement model that we may work from. This is in the upper right and going around. We may often start with developing our methodology in a proposal, which is done within a core group. We could call that the lab. And sometimes we may have a client in that lab, but it's when we develop our own proposals and methodologies, take those into the studio and try, and develop engagements with the clients. But then the stakeholders for the clients are in the arena where decisions are made, and decisions and the outcomes and the maps that are used for implementation. The agreements are made in the arena, and the agora can be considered a place where it's more public, or for education, it's more open. And there's a lot about that in the book. And so there are 30 tools in the book, and these 5 convening modes. So these are different workshop styles also described in the book, but they are arranged from 1 to 5 here that are associated to different stages of the tools. So I'm going to share 2 tools with you. And we're hoping to spend about 35 minutes in this, and to have 25 minutes. I realize 10 minutes left to do that, but I'll share my tool in less than 5 minutes here. So we'll share 2 tools, and give you this overview. But first, I want to just pop 2 questions out there, because this is to kind of keep in mind for the facilitated part. Oh, and by the way, if you do have other questions and you don't want to lose them, put them in the chat, and we can come back to that in the Q&A. So these are the questions that we're thinking as prompts is just think about services and systems and how they differ. And think about the service design that you might be doing and how does that interface with service? How do your services interface with systems? And do systems have power over services? And do they constrain and conflict sometimes in your service design? And then how do these modes of design or these features change the design methods that we use in service design projects as service design becomes more complex? So Kristel we'll share the rich context. Do you want to share your slides, Kristel, and then I can bring mine back up? Or you want me to, because you've got a builds there.
Sorry, I was on mute still. I will share my screen. Okay, so I will present you one of the two tools that we are talking about today, which is the rich context. And basically, it's a tool, a method based on a framework of Professor Geels, a professor from the Netherlands. And basically, almost all the tools in the book are based on frameworks of design thinkers and systems thinkers. So some of them we really invented from scratch, but most of them are really based on learning from the years of the systemic design conferences. And so what Geels is telling in his paper is that if you have innovations, they always come from niches. And they are there because there is pressure on the landscape, there is pressure on the context of the system, and there should be a new way of doing. And what the niches are then doing is trying to get into the regime, into the current landscape. And that's a very important notion because it's very important to look at niche initiatives. And if there are no niche initiatives happening, so no new ways of doing to address the current issue, that means that or there is no need for change, or there is no possibility for change. Because, for example, there is a dictator who is against every change. And so if there are no niche initiatives, don't even start a systemic design project. It's a waste of time. But if you do find them, it's really good to analyze them because they give you already like 80% of the pathway to go. That's one of the fantastic things in systemic design is that they really lead you towards where you should be heading at. And so what is this tool about? It's a tool to think about why should the system change? What are the big challenges today? How is the dominant system currently responding to these challenges? And who is responding in a new way, in a new innovative way? And so the tool works like this. In the middle, you map the long-term trends. So what is pushing pressure on the system? Then around that, you map what the current practices are, how is society currently dealing with this, and then around that you map out the niche initiatives. So who is doing things in new, innovative way? And why do you do this? Because you want to interview those people. You want to interview the ones of the current regime, the current way of doing, and you definitely want to interview the ones who are doing things in an innovative way. And here is an example. This is about migration. So what is the pressure on the system? There is a climate change, there is increasing violent conflicts and wars. So people are moving away from their country, they are fleeing to the countries where there is less war, less heat. And so what's happening today, this is here in Europe, there are refugee camps, there are European funds for migrant integration. In Belgium, a lot of refugees are sleeping in the streets and in the metros. And there is this mindset of, at least in Belgium, but all over Europe, that asylum seekers should adapt to the national values. And then what are new ways of doing? Here in Brussels, citizens are hosting refugees. There are volunteers who are working for people who are new in Belgium. There are policymakers were starting up dialogues with micro communities. Yeah, okay, that was the example. So that's how you use the tool, and then you will analyze who do you want to meet. I want to meet somebody working in a refugee camp. I want to meet some refugees sleeping in the streets. I want to meet some people to understand their mindset about refugees. I definitely want to see the citizens who are hosting refugees, etc. Then you go to the next phase where you go out and you interview those people. Peter, up to you.
Okay, so let me back to the slides. System value proposition is the second tool. And this also has a multi-level organization, like many of the system tools do, those with concentric circles. However, it is not based on the Gale's multi-level perspective directly as the rich context is. So I thought this would be a good one to share both because, especially in service design, having a model such as the rich context, as Kristel had described, is very helpful because you can get the different perspectives of your, of the stakeholders you're working with, your clients, the sponsors, on who the actors are, so that you can really take the next step in your research. But you're also framing. It is a framing exercise, and it may change the way that you proceed with the service design, the system. Oh, I didn't finish this. Oh, there. So here's this. You should be seeing the system value proposition now. I didn't finish the second click. You know how you're supposed to double click? I just clicked once and it didn't pop the screen up. So this is a picture of the original model from which Elke van Uden, that we developed the system value proposition from, which is multi-level of system organization, but it's different than the multi-level perspective. So see that you might have a user or a citizen, a human in the center, an individual that is receiving value in the value co-creation in the service model. There's an organization that that can be multiple organizations, but there's an organizational level, an ecosystem, a society, and a larger society is conceived as that which is responsible for and making decisions on behalf of the value that is received in those different levels. And so this is nicely paired with the rich context, because what you've developed in the framing of the rich context identifies through the multi-level perspective which actors are important to translate and develop a value for. That may be an outcome of a service, but that has impact in the system, in the social systems, in the different and in the institutions or the organizations that may even interface with that service. It may not be directly part of the service, but it may provide value through the different changes that ripple through. So this is where we're interested in the system value proposition in creating, kind of a systemic version of the value proposition, which is a typical business tool defined by a strategy team to describe the unique value and benefits of a product or service to its users in the market, and about the competitive advantage that it has in the marketplace. So the competitive advantage aspect is also translated from the rich context, where you have identified niche initiatives. And if there aren't a lot of niche initiatives, you may be very new in the market. You may actually determine, if you're extremely new and you don't have a lot of competitors, you even haven't found them, or, you would be taking you would be looking at more of a system change as an introduction, as a new intervention into the system. So these are different ways of checking, your introduction, your creation of the value. And so we think of the system value proposition as a total value proposition for all these levels of the system. So it does have a view of the micro, meso, and macro, but it's not the same as the multi-level perspective in the rich context. Here we're actually translating those to different types at the individual, organizational, and societal level. And we are interested in answering these questions: value for whom in these different levels, who benefits, and how can we describe the value that will be received, and what are the different lenses or aspects of value. So there are 4 quadrants: the economic, ecological, psychological, and social. And so those are places where there might be leverage points as well. So as we start to define value, this tool then can be translated to interventions and to design proposals. So here we're envisioning value across a social ecosystem of these levels that will translate to program interventions. So at the human level, individual, organizations, and broad societal value. So we work with consumerism a lot as a context. And so if we look at that, we might conceive of everyone in the center as being some type of consumer, and there might be value that's economic, social, psychological at the consumer level, at the retailer or manufacturers and the distributors level, the second ring, and across the larger culture of the world population, even, or depending on how it's defined. And as we start to populate the system value, we can think of, well, what is of value that we are creating here? So the consumer, economic, they might be actually interested in saving money, or reducing inflation impact, lowering the ecological footprint or impact on the environment, which is on the ecological quadrant, across organizations, developing virtuous relationships with better suppliers and materials in a circular economy approach, creating more ethical industry overall. The consumer level, we might also have peace of mind as a psychological value, the well-being of the workers in the companies and across other, and in the suppliers as well. So this actually crosses, the organizations and other populations, other countries, psychological and social. So it could go on all those levels, belonging to ethical entrepreneurs. And as you can imagine, this can be very complex. Now, you might not show it to investors, like if you're a startup and you're then using this slide and going, this is our value proposition, this is what you might create, but you're going to have to distill it into something that's going to be maybe more attractive version of this last one. But this is what the tool often looks like once we've populated it. And this is in Toronto, Sustainable Housing for Toronto. And so it has distinct kind of value creation out of their proposals for economic, environmental, psychosocial, and also political, because it's kind of a political issue as well to intervene in the housing market, which provides a lot of money for developers and other powerful actors. So we're trying to create, it almost has to be a political decision to create more innovative housing styles and such. So and so Kristel, if you want, I can just kind of step through the next couple of slides if you want to say anything about the other projects that we've done, and before we just open it up.
Yeah, I can maybe explain some of my projects. One of the things I did last year is with a group of 40 organizations in healthcare. We were looking into how could we increase health literacy in Belgium, and this led to a number of interventions that they are now elaborating on. Then for IKEA, we did a project and a whole toolkit basically to help IKEA to work with social entrepreneurs. And the case that we tried out was to make IKEA affordable to poor people. Then the next one is yours, Peter.
Oh, yeah. Well, municipal strategic planning, we've developed actually, training for municipal leaders and models that have come from the toolkit that have been simplified so they can be used to map out climate change and strategic planning for municipalities. And we've turned those into some standards that we can use for other cities.
And then the last one is quite an interesting one, because this most of the projects we do in systemic design are social, but this one was about helping the agency, the innovation agency of the European Commission, to rethink its services towards SMEs in the whole of Europe. And this went very well.
Okay, and so we want to say you can download the toolkit if you don't have it already, and so that's available for free. And Kristel, how many tools are on the online toolkit? Is it still 30, or did you add any others?
There are all the 30 tools, but also the variations.
Mhm. Good. So we'd like to open it up here then for questions.